The morning the man in the gray traveling coat walked up the frostbitten drive of Renholt, Cassandra Ely was on her knees in the kitchen garden, breaking the last of the leeks from ground that had gone hard as iron overnight. She did not hear the gate. She heard the dogs, which had not barked at a stranger in 3 years because no stranger with money had come to Renholt in 3 years, and she looked up with the dirt still cold on her gloves and saw a tall figure standing very still at the head of the drive, looking not at the house but at the row of lindens her late master had planted the year his son was born. The figure did not move. He looked at those trees the way a man looks, at a grave he has walked a long way to find. Behind her, from the scullery window, old Bram the steward said, the word she would come to dread. He said it low, almost to himself, the way a man says a thing he does not want to be true. He said, that's the collector. And then, because Bram had served the family for 40 years, and knew the shape of ruin when it stood in a drive, he crossed himself, which she had never once seen him do. You have perhaps stood somewhere you loved and watched a stranger decide its fate. If that image holds you, stay with this one a while. Some of you will know before I tell you what that stillness in the drive was made of. Renholt had not always been a house that flinched at footsteps. Cassandra had come to it at 19 as companion to the old Viscount's widowed sister, and when the sister died, she had stayed on, because there was nowhere for a clergyman's daughter with no dowry to go, and because the old Viscount, Lord Harrow, had said in his blunt, kind way that a house needed one person in it who could keep accounts and one who could keep peace, and she had turned out to be both. She was 26 now. She wore her mourning grays past the year they were owed because they were the soberest gowns she had, and because grief at Renholt had not ended when the black crape came down. The old Viscount had died the previous spring with a debt around his neck none of them had known the weight of. There had been a son once. Everyone in the county knew the story the way they knew the church spire, without needing to look at it. Julian Harrow had gone to sea 8 years before, a wild, difficult young man sent abroad after some quarrel with his father that no one repeated in front of servants, and word had come 2 winters later that his ship had gone down off the coast of Portugal with all hands. The old Viscount had never spoken his son's name again. He had planted no new trees. He had let the debt gather in the dark like water in a cellar, and when he died it came up through the floorboards of every room. So the estate passed sideways to a cousin nobody at Renholt had met, a Mr. Fenwick of London, who had written 3 letters in as many months, each one colder than the last, and who had at length informed them that the entailed lands were burdened beyond their worth, and that a man of business would be sent to determine what might be recovered. That was the word in Fenwick's letter, recovered, as though the house itself were a thing that had been stolen from him and might be taken back. Cassandra had read that letter aloud to the assembled household in the servants' hall, because she believed people had a right to know the shape of the thing coming for them. She had stood at the head of the scrubbed table with the single tallow candle, guttering, and read Fenwick's cold hand out slowly, so that Bram, whose ears had begun to fail, would catch every word. There were 9 of them left. Bram the steward, gone stooped and slow, who had carried the old Viscount to bed drunk more than once in the good years, and never spoke of it. Mrs. Dawlish the cook, whose wages had not been paid in full since Michaelmas, and who stayed anyway, because, as she put it, a body did not walk out on a sinking ship to prove a point to the water. 2 housemaids, Sally and Jane, who shared a bed under the eaves and a single good shawl between them. A groom named Firth, who kept 2 aging carriage horses fed on charity hay from a neighbor who had not yet the heart to charge for it. A scullery girl of 14 named Peg, sharp-eyed and quick, who had come to Renholt from the workhouse and would rather have died than go back. And Lucy, the undergardener's daughter, 6 years old, born in the east bedroom on a snowing night, who had never in her life been beyond the park wall and thought the row of lindens at the drive's head was the edge of the world. Cassandra had folded the letter along its worn creases and set it down and looked at each of them in turn, and she had said that, whatever came, they would meet it standing, and that no one would be turned out into a hedge while she had breath to prevent it. It was a promise she was not certain she could keep, and she had made it anyway, because a promise kept people upright through a winter better than truth did. Mrs. Ball. Dawlish had folded her red arms across her apron and said, in the flat way of a woman who has stopped expecting mercy, "They always send a hard man to do a hard thing." Bram had said nothing at all. He had only looked at the empty chair at the table's foot, where the old master had used to sit of an evening with his pipe, and then he had got up and banked the fire, so it would last the night, because coal too was a thing they now counted. They had. He came up the drive in a gray coat with a leather case under his arm, and when he reached the door he did not knock. He stood on the step and looked at the iron boot scraper, and something moved across his face that Cassandra, watching from the hall window, could not read. Then he lifted the knocker and let it fall once, and the sound went through the empty house like a stone dropped down a well. She opened the door herself. There was no footman left grand enough to do it. He was perhaps 34, tall and lean in a way that spoke of hard years rather than fashion, with dark hair cut close and a face weathered brown by sun. She did not think England had given him. There was a thin, pale scar that ran from the corner of his left eyebrow up into his hairline, old and healed silver. His eyes were a gray, so dark they were nearly the color of the coat. He looked at her the way a man reads a page he already knows, and for one strange moment she had the sensation of being recognized by a stranger. "Miss Ely," he said. "Not a question." "You have the advantage of me, sir." "Mr. Vane," he said. "I am here on Mr. Fenwick's instruction to inventory the estate and its debts." His voice was low and level, and carried no cruelty in it, which somehow was worse. "You may show me the accounts, or I may find them myself. I would prefer the first." She stood aside and let the debt collector into the house he had been born in, and neither of them said so because only one of them yet knew. To the household, in those first days, he was the collector, and nothing else. Mrs. Dawlish said the word over her pastry with her mouth set hard. The groom said it in the stable, spitting after. He walked the rooms of Renholt with his leather case and his silence, and he wrote in a small book, and he asked questions that were always exactly the right questions, which frightened Cassandra more than ignorance would have. He knew the house was older in its west wing. He knew the home farm had been let to a tenant named Coombs, and asked after Coombs by a name Cassandra had not given him. He stood a long while in the library before the portraits, and said nothing at all. She watched him because it was her business to watch him, she told herself. Because a woman responsible for 9 souls in a house did not have the luxury of trusting a man sent to price her home for sale. She noticed that he did not eat the dinner Mrs. Dawlish grudgingly sent up, mutton stewed thin and a heel of bread, but left it covered on the tray, and came down at night to the kitchen, when he thought the house asleep, and ate bread and cold meat standing at the deal table like a servant, as though he had no right to a chair in his own borrowed employment. She noticed he had asked for no fire in the best bedroom, and taken instead the small blue room over the kitchen, where the chimney breast held the day's heat, and she could not decide whether that was thrift on Fenwick's behalf, or some older habit of a man used to close quarters. She noticed that he flinched one bare instant, when Lucy ran through the hall on some errand of her own, and her laugh rang up the stairwell bright and heedless, and that he turned his face to the window and stood a moment with his jaw set before he moved again. She noticed that he walked the passages without a candle, sure-footed in the dark, as though his feet knew a way. His eyes were pretending not to. She noticed his hands. They were not a clerk's hands. They were scarred across the knuckles and calloused at the palm, the hands of a man who had hauled rope and lifted weight, and when he wrote in his little book he held the pen as though it were an unfamiliar tool he had learned to master through sheer discipline. On the third night she found him in the long gallery with a single candle, standing before the portrait of the old Viscount, and she stopped in the doorway with her own candle, and did not announce herself, and she saw his face without its guard for the first time. He was not appraising the frame. He was looking at the painted face the way the living look at the dead, when there is something left unsaid between them, and no more time in which to say it. Grief. It was grief plain and terrible, and she felt she had trespassed on something she had no name for. "The frame is only deal beneath the gilt," he said without turning. It will not fetch what Fenwick hopes." His voice was level, but the candle in his hand was not quite steady. "You knew him," Cassandra said. She had not meant to say it. For a long moment he did not answer. Then, "I knew of him," tashed. Men of business learn a family before they learn its ledgers. He turned then, and his face was the collector's face again, closed and even. And she wondered if she had imagined the other. "You keep good accounts, Miss Ely? Better than the estate deserved. Why?" "Because someone must," she said. "And because these people have nowhere else. Bram has served 40 years. Mrs. Dawlish has not been paid since autumn and has not left. There is a child here who was born in the east bedroom and thinks the lindens outside her window are the edge of the world. You will put figures beside all of that in your little book. I only ask that you remember. The figures are people before you carry them to London." She had spoken more sharply than was wise to a man who held their fate. She waited for the cold rebuke. Instead, he looked at her a long moment, and something in the set of his jaw eased and then hardened again, as though he had permitted himself a feeling and then confiscated it. "Go to bed, Miss Ely," he said. "It is cold and you have been on your feet since before light. I saw you in the garden." It was a command. It was flatly a command, and she should have resented it. Underneath it, though, there was some care he would not let rise to the surface. And she found herself at the door of her own small room before she understood that she had obeyed him and that her face was warm in the freezing passage. The house had decided he was the collector. Cassandra was no longer sure the house was right. The days shortened toward the year's end, and the frost did not lift. Vane worked through the estate with a thoroughness that would have been merciless in another man. But Cassandra began to notice the pattern of his questions bending a particular way. He asked which cottages had leaking roofs and marked them, but he did not mark them for demolition as Fenwick's letter had instructed. He asked Bram how many years the old steward had left in him, and when Bram said grimly that he supposed he would work until they carried him out, Vane wrote something and closed the book and said nothing. He asked to see the parish register in the cold church at the foot of the park, and Cassandra walked him there through the bare lindens, and he stood before the Harrow tombs for a long time with his hat in his hands. There was a new stone. The old Viscount's, and beside it, older, a smaller one, Cassandra had never fully understood. A memorial without a body, cut with the name of the son Julian drowned at sea, aged 23, and below it, a line his father had ordered carved in a fit of grief. The county still talked of. "He was not lost to me by his own choosing." Vane read that line for a long time. When he spoke, his voice had gone rough at the edges, the first crack she had heard in it. "A hard epitaph," he said, "to be forgiven only in stone." "They quarreled," Cassandra said quietly. "No one knows over what. The old Viscount sent him away, and then the boy died before either could take back a word of it. I think it broke something in his father that never mended. He never planted another tree. Did you know that? He planted a linden for every good year of his life, and after the news came he never planted another." Vane's hand had risen to the breast of his coat, where she would later learn a thing was kept, that he touched the way other men touch a wound. He lowered it. "Perhaps the boy was not worth a tree," he said. "Perhaps the boy never knew his father wanted to plant one," she answered. "Grief and pride wear the same coat. From the outside you cannot always tell which one has come to the door." He looked at her then as though she had struck him, and she did not know why, and he turned and walked out of the churchyard into the failing light, and she followed, and neither spoke the whole way back through the trees. That night, all the same, the dinner tray came down empty for the first time, and Peg reported with wonder that the hard man from London had thanked her for it. By name! I will tell you now, the thing the household did not know, because you have likely guessed it. And it is a cruelty to make you wait. The man in the grey coat was no man of business. He had not learned the family before its ledgers. He was the family. The old Viscount's son had not gone down off the coast of Portugal. He had been pressed from a foundering wreck onto a warship, had served and fought and been taken and served again, had spent 8 years hauling rope under other men's names on the far side of the world, believing his father would not have him back, and later that his father was beyond wanting him. Learning too late through a chance-met sailor from his own county that the old Viscount had died, with his son's name unspoken, and a debt swallowing the only home either of them had loved. He had come home under a borrowed name because he did not know if there was a home left to come to, and because a dead man has no debts and no grief to answer for. And it is easier to look at the ruin of everything you failed than to be known while you do it. He touched the breast of his coat because a miniature was sewn into the lining there, not of a sweetheart, of his mother, dead when he was 9, the one soft thing in a hard boyhood, painted the year before she died. He had carried it through every wreck and every war. It was the only thing that had come home whole. Cassandra did not know this. She only knew that the collector had begun to sleep badly, that she heard him in the night, walking the gallery, and that one gray afternoon she came upon him in the nursery, the disused east room where no child had slept since the young master was small, standing among the shrouded furniture with a wooden horse in his scarred hands, its paint worn to bare wood at the saddle, where a small thumb had rubbed it for years. He did not hear her. Lucy did. The child had followed Cassandra up, as she followed her everywhere, and now she slipped past into the room and looked up at the tall, grim stranger and said, with the terrible directness of the very young, "That is the sad horse. Bram says a boy used to ride it who went in the water and did not come out. Are you sad because of the horse?" Cassandra saw the man's face come apart, only for a moment, only for the length of a breath. Then he went down on one knee, slow and careful, until his eyes were level with the child's, and he said, in a voice she had not heard him use, gentle as she would not have believed him capable of, "I am not sad about the horse. The horse is glad someone still visits him." And he set the wooden horse in Lucy's hands and closed her small fingers around it and stood, and turned, and saw Cassandra in the doorway, and for one unguarded instant the collector and the grieving man were the same face, and she understood that she was looking at something she was not meant to see and could no longer unsee. "She should not be up here," he said. "It is cold." And he went past them both and down the stairs, and Cassandra stood holding Lucy's hand and felt the floor of her understanding shift beneath her, like ice over a river. That was the day she began, without permitting herself the word, to fall. She fought it the way a sensible woman fights a fever, by refusing to name it, and by working harder. There was much to work at. Ward had reached the county that Renholt was to be assessed and likely sold, and the vultures who circle a dying estate began to circle. Chief among them was Sir Rowland Pruitt, a florid squire from the neighboring parish, who had wanted Renholt's water meadows for a decade and now saw his chance, and who came to call ostensibly to pay respects to the memory of the old Viscount, and actually to walk the collector round the boundaries and murmur about a fair price for a quick sale. He was a large man who filled a room by displacing its air, loud in his condolences and louder in his figures, and he had a way of clapping a hand to a mantelpiece as though he already owned it. He brought his sister, the widow, Mrs. Aldous, a handsome, cold woman in expensive half-mourning, gray silk and jet beads, who came into the shabby drawing-room and let her gaze travel across the faded curtains and the worn Turkey carpet and the place on the wall where a picture had been sold, doing sums, and who looked last of all at Cassandra's mended gloves and dismissed her in a single glance, and thereafter spoke over her as though she were furniture. Cassandra brought the tea herself because there was no one grand enough to carry it, and poured, and was not thanked, and sat at the edge of the group with the cooling pot, because to leave would be to concede the room, and she had learned long ago that a companion held her ground quietly, or not at all. Mrs. Aldous took her cup, without looking at the hand that offered it. Sir Rowland talked of drainage and dry rot, and the burden of a decayed house upon a sensible purchaser, and every third sentence turned, as if by accident, to the water meadows, which he described as boggy and useless, and offered, out of pure neighborliness, to take off the estate's hands. "Of course the companion has done what she could," Mrs. Aldous said in the drawing-room to Vane of Cassandra. "In Cassandra's hearing, one admires the loyalty of the lower sort. But a girl of no family cannot be expected to manage a gentleman's affairs. It wants a firm hand and a proper settlement. My brother is prepared to be generous." She smiled at Vane. And a man of business must be glad to see a troublesome matter closed. There it was. The dismissal spoken plainly in a warm room by a woman in diamonds who had decided in one look who Cassandra was and what she was worth. A companion. A girl of no family. The lower sort. Cassandra kept her eyes on the tea things and her hands quiet in her lap and said nothing, because there was nothing to be gained by speaking. And she felt the old, cold message settle over her again. The one her whole life had taught her that she was useful and unseen. That she would keep other people's houses and hold other people's children and never be chosen, never be the one the room turned toward. She felt, rather than saw, the collector go still across the room. And when Sir Rowland laughed and said something jovial about the sale being as good as done, Vane set down his cup and said in a voice level as a laid rule, "Nothing here is decided. Miss Ely's accounts are the only competent record of this estate I have found. I place a great deal of weight upon them." He did not look at Cassandra as he said it. He looked at Sir Rowland. Yet the words fell across the room and landed in her lap like a coat laid over cold shoulders. And Mrs. Aldous' smile thinned to a line. When the Pruitts had gone, when the sound of Sir Rowland's carriage had faded down the drive, and the house had let out its held breath, Cassandra carried the tea things back to the kitchen and washed them herself in water gone cold, and only then, when her hands had something to do, did she let herself feel how the afternoon had scraped her raw. She went to the study to return the household book to its shelf. She found him there at the desk in the last of the light, and she said, because she could not help it, the words coming out before her caution could stop them, "You need not have done that. It changes nothing. She is right about what I am." "She is right about nothing," he said, and the flatness in his voice was not coldness now. She had learned the difference. "You have kept 9 people and a house alive on a dead man's debts and no wages. There is not a steward in London who could have done it. Do not let a woman, in borrowed diamonds, tell you what you are worth. She cannot count." Cassandra's throat closed. She had not been defended in a very long time. She had forgotten what it did to a person to be seen and named and set right side up. "Why do you care?" she asked. "You are here to price it and go." He was quiet a long moment. His hand rose to the breast of his coat and stopped. "Because I have spent a great many years," he said at last, "being reckoned as less than I was by people who could not count. It leaves a mark. I do not like to see it left on another." It was the most he had ever said of himself. It was, she understood later, very near to the truth, closer than he had meant to come. At the time she only heard a hard man admit a soft thing, and she carried it up to her cold room and lay awake with it a long while, and when she slept she dreamed of the lindens in leaf. The blow, when it came in an envelope. Fenwick, impatient, had grown suspicious of the delay. His man Vane had been at Wrenholt above a month, and sent no valuation. A second letter arrived, this one, to be opened by Bram in the collector's absence, instructing the steward that if Mr. Topper, Vane proved dilatory, the sale was to proceed regardless, that Sir Rowland Pruitt's offer for the water meadows was accepted, that the household was to be dismissed without character or wages owed, being the burden of an insolvent estate and no charge upon the new owner, and that the child Lucy and her father were to be turned off the land by Lady Day. Cassandra read it standing in the cold hall and felt the world tilt turned off without wages. 9 people into a winter county, with no reference and no roof. Lucy, who thought the Lindens were the edge of the world, put outside them onto a road. And the man she had begun, God help her, to trust, revealed, after all, as Fenwick's instrument, sent to lull them while the sale was arranged behind their backs. She did not weep. She had learned not to. She waited for him in the study, and when he came in from the frost with the cold on his coat, she put the letter on the desk between them and said in a voice she was proud to hear, did not shake, "Was this the whole of it, then? Keep us quiet. with kind words, while the thing is signed. In London, you knew, you have known, since you came. The old wound had opened all the way. The message of her whole life confirmed at last in the one place she had let herself hope it might not be true. I took you for a better man than your master. That was my mistake. It has always been my mistake to think that being useful might one day be enough to be kept. He went very white. He read the letter, and his hands, when he set it down, were not steady at all. I did not know of this, he said, Cassandra. It was the first time he had used her given name. It stopped her breath, wrongly, at the worst of all moments. I swear to you I did not know. You are Fenwick's man. I am not Fenwick's man. Something was breaking in his face, some long discipline giving way like a rope worn through. I have never been Fenwick's man. Sit down. No, do not go. I am going to tell you a thing I have told no living soul, and then you may hate me, with better aim. She did not sit, though, and he did not tell her. Not then, because Peg came running white-faced to say Sir Rowland's men were already at the water meadows with stakes and a chain, measuring off the sail as though it were done, and that Lucy's father had gone down to stop them, and there was shouting. And the collector went out of the study and across the frozen park, at a dead run with his coat flying, and Cassandra ran after him, and the thing that had been coming to Wrenholt for 8 years arrived all at once in a cold meadow under a white sky. Sir Rowland's men had driven their first stake. Lucy's father stood before it with a spade held crosswise, outnumbered and about to be handled, and Lucy herself had somehow got down there and stood clutching the wooden horse and crying, and one of the squire's men had his hand on the child's father's collar. Vane crossed the last of the meadow and put himself between the men and the family, and he did not raise a hand. He raised his voice, and it came out of him with an authority that had nothing of the man of business in it, and everything of the master of a house. Take your hands off my land. The meadow went silent. Sir Rowland, red-faced, blustered that the land was as good as his, that he had Fenwick's word, that the man forgot himself. And Vane stood in the snow with his mother's face sewn over his heart, and 8 years of the far side of the world in his shoulders, and said the thing at last, said it plainly, said it in the open where it could never be taken back. I am Julian Harrow. This is my land, and these are my people. I told you. Some of you knew. I think even those who guessed did not guess what it would cost him to say it aloud in a cold field to a man holding a chain. He said it once. He did not shout it. He said it the way a man lays down a weight he has carried so long, his body has bent to its shape. And the strangest thing happened in that meadow, which was that old Bram, who had come stumping down the hill after them, stopped stock still and stared, and then his ruined old face crumpled, and he said, "It's the young master! Lord, help us. It's his eyes. It was always his eyes." 40 years of service knew what a month of suspicion had not let itself believe. The county learned the rest across a fortnight, and the law confirmed what the meadow had proclaimed. He had been pressed, taken for dead, come home to find his father in the ground and his name on a stone. Julian, living, being the direct heir of the entail, could not be dispossessed by a cousin. The entail passed to the blood, and the blood had walked up the drive in a grey coat. Fenwick's claim collapsed. Sir Rowland's purchase made on a false vendor's authority was so much waste paper. The vultures scattered as vultures do when the thing they thought was carrion sits up. The law, however, is not the same as the heart, and it was not the law Cassandra had to make peace with. It was that the man she had defended and doubted, and begun to love, was the master of the house she served. A viscount now, in truth, as far above a clergyman's portionless daughter as the lindens were above the leeks. She understood at once, with the swift, terrible clarity of her whole life's training, what this meant. He would need a wife of family, Mrs. Aldous, or someone like her, someone with diamonds that were not borrowed. And Cassandra would keep his accounts perhaps if she were fortunate, and hold his children when they came, and never once be the one the room turned toward. The dismissal she had swallowed all her life would simply wear a kinder face. So she did. The only thing her pride and her love left her. She meant to go. She wrote it out clean. That she was glad past speaking that Renholt was safe and its people kept. That she would stay only until the spring quarter to settle the books into a proper steward's hands. And then she would seek a situation elsewhere, and she signed it. And left it on the study desk where he would find it. And she went up to pack the small trunk that held the whole of what she owned in the world. He found her there. He did not knock. He came into her small, cold room with her letter crushed in his scarred hand and his face like a man who has run a long way, and he said her name, and then he said the thing that undid her. You told me once that grief and pride wear the same coat, that from the outside you cannot tell which one has come to the door. He came no closer. He stood in the doorway, as though asking leave. I have worn both for 8 years. I came home dead because I was too proud to come home living and be refused. I let this house think me a stranger because I could not bear to be known and found wanting. And now I stand here and watch you do the very thing I did. You are leaving before you can be refused. Do not. I am asking you not to. You are a viscount, she said, and her voice broke on it. And I am the companion. Mrs. Aldous was right about one thing. You will need a wife the county can accept. The county, he said, can go hang. He crossed the room, then, at last, and stopped an arm's length from her, close enough that she felt the cold still coming off his coat and the warmth beneath it. I have spent 8 years being told what I was, by men who could not see me. I will not spend 1 hour of the life I have left, telling another soul what she is worth. By any measure but the true one, you kept my father's house standing when my father's blood had failed it. You saw a hard stranger and looked for the man inside the coat, Cassandra. I do not want a wife the county can accept. I want the woman who told a man in a churchyard that his father had wanted, all along, to plant him a tree. She was weeping now, silently the way she had taught herself, and he lifted one scarred hand, slowly, giving her every moment to refuse it, and with the backs of his fingers he touched the tears at her cheek as though they were something precious he had no right to and could not help but reach for. She did not step back. Her whole body knew where he was in the room, had known since the first day, and now the knowing had nowhere left to hide. Say you will stay, he said very low. Say you will stay, and I will plant the trees my father did not, one for every year. I mean to be worth having. It will be a long avenue. I intend to give it a great many years. And Cassandra, who had spent her whole life being useful and unseen, who had never once been the one the room turned toward, looked up into the dark gray eyes of the man the sea had given back, and found that at last in this one cold room at the frozen end of the year, she was seen entire and chosen and named. I will stay, she said. He did not kiss her at once. He drew her against him and held her, her cheek against the breast of his coat where his mother's face was sewn, and she felt his breath go out of him all at once, the long-held breath of a man who has finally set down his dead. And only after a while, when she lifted her face, did he lower his mouth to hers, softly. A kiss full of every word neither of them had said, and all the years they meant to say them in. Outside the window the frost held the lindens black against the white, waiting, as everything at Renholt had waited, for the spring that was coming now. They were married in the cold church at the foot of the park before Candlemas, quietly, with the whole household in the front pews where the family should sit, because Julian said the household was his family, and he would not hear otherwise. Bram gave the bride away and wept the whole time, and was not ashamed. Mrs. Dawlish, her wages paid in full and a purse of arrears besides, cooked as though feeding a coronation. Lucy carried the wooden horse up the aisle because she would not be parted from it, and set it on the altar step for the length of the vows, and no one told her not to. By spring, the lindens were in leaf, and there were saplings among them. A whole young row at the drive's head, and the master of Renholt planted each one himself with his scarred hands. And the first he planted for his father. and the second for his mother, and the third he planted with his wife's hand under his on the spade, and did not say for whom, because some things are known. Without saying, the old memorial stone in the churchyard was not taken down. Julian would not have it moved. Beneath the line his father had carved in grief, though he ordered a second line cut, and it read only, "He came home." And in the evenings when the fire was lit in the drawing room, and the frost was gone from the glass, Cassandra kept the accounts still because she liked to, and because they were her own now, and sometimes she would look up and find him watching her across the room, not as a collector counts a thing to be carried off, but as a man looks at the one true thing that came home whole, and she would hold his gaze, unhurried, and not look away. If Cassandra's story stayed with you, if you have ever been the useful and the unseen and waited to be chosen, tell me the moment that reached you, and stay a while longer by whatever fire you have. There is warmth in a house that was almost lost, and was kept. There is warmth enough, I think, to share.